سلام تخطاتلت مدب السنة زخب كتما لندن عد إنجليز ندات دالوز بس حكم زلو مدبنا مدب إرتراويانيو أبز مدب زي كلنا زي كلنا عنا هن إرتراويان زملكت قدايات نحنا إرتراويان نملكتو قدايات ندال علنا نمات ألو مدب يلومون كموترو قاشا حيزلكم متسيلخو قاشاي بروفيسور دان كونيل دان إرتراويان ناينويح جزي عاركنايو بزح كاب زي قدلي جميركا صحيجي بزح نجارات زبركته ناي نوح زي عاركي سلازي أبزي كونتات أب هاجر نازل له كونتات أب زوبا نازل له كونتات مس إثيوبيا زلوا كونتات كلهم دال علنا نحن الزرارب عدي ميول له welcome Dan. It's an honor to be welcoming you to the Eritrean show. Although the context of our talks this afternoon is war, and but as a long-standing friend of Eritreans and Eritrea, as an expert in the region, so Dan, as a friend of Eritrea and Eritreans, somebody who has been very familiar with that part of the world for so long, I think you're one of the best qualified people to talk about these issues, and it's an honor to have you here. And welcome. I really do warmly welcome you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to be here under such poor circumstances.
It is really unfortunate that the issues that have brought us here aren't what anyone that has got the best interest of that region at heart would want to talk about. It's been a very harrowing 10-11 days. And I know you've followed it very closely, and so have many of us. But just for the sake of those people who haven't perhaps been following us closely, as they might have, what is happening? What's going on in Ethiopia, in Eritrea, in the Horn of Africa, in that region as a whole?
Well, in the last week and a half, we have had a war breakout, the third one in 30 years, basically, that involves a three-way alliance against Tigray, involving the federal government of Ethiopia, the state government of Amhara, and the state of Eritrea, all from different vantage points coming together to attack Tigray to displace the TPLF. This has been coming for a very long time, and I think the tragedy here is that there were many places where this could have been resolved. The tensions could have been resolved without it coming to this. But now that we're there, we're in a situation where you have forces attacking Tigray on the western side, on the southern side, and the northern side. The latest that I have heard is that there has been fighting with Amhara nationalist forces in the west, that there have been reports of Eritrean forces involved in three areas along the border: Humara, along the corner there with Sudan and Ethiopia and Eritrea, the Zalambasa Zorona area in the center of the country, and the Afar area as well. Mm-hmm. And of course, the Afar state in Ethiopia is the shortest route to get to Mekelle. Mm-hmm. So there is an effort that is, and of course, federal forces are involved as well, from initially from within Tigray, but also coming from Ethiopia. They were clearly positioned there in order to attack from the Eritrean side of the border in advance. And they're coming up from the south. The situation has become very dire for many of the people caught in the crossfire here, of course, and there are refugees pouring out of the country into Sudan. The latest that I have heard, the UN, I think, is reporting 17,000 refugees have come out with them. And we don't know how many more, of course, have come out and not registered. So assume there are several tens of thousands. A new camp has been set up, Rakuba, near Hamdayat, the village outside Gedaref. a village that was a camp that was originally set up in the 1980s for Eritreans coming out, and now you've got a mix of Tigrayans coming out, civilians, and Eritrean and Ethiopian soldiers who are refusing to fight, as I understand it. So you've got a situation that is complex, involves many states at once, will have reverberations throughout the Ethiopian state. There's also conflict in Wolega right now in Western Ethiopia that's not being reported. They've shut off communications, of course, making it very difficult to get reports. And there is the possibility of more unrest within the Oromo state itself, where there's a lot of tension over Abiy's rule and him dragging Ethiopia back into a war that didn't need to happen. So I think we're at a crucial moment here, where if this is not contained, it could spin completely out of control with terrible consequences for the people in Tigray, particular consequences for the Eritrean refugees who are based there, and for the region as a whole.
Yeah, yes, it is a crucial and worrying moment for all involved. But what's rather perplexing is the combination of the forces that are fighting and the potential, the potential conflict. The conflict of interest within those groups as well. For instance, a lot of the Amhara forces that have been quick to align themselves with Isaias and Eritrea are not even all convinced about the independence of Eritrea. They're convinced that the Eritrea was made independent through the conspiracy between TPLF and EPLF, and TPLF actually kind of compromised on Ethiopia's interest on Eritrea's independence, and yet here we have them fighting alongside Isaias Afwerki, and it really doesn't make sense, does it?
It does and it doesn't. I think you've got an alliance of convenience here, and it's a dangerous one in the future. You could look at the various alliances that have come up in the past with the premise that the enemy is my friend, and that's what's going on here. If there's a coincidence of interest now, there may not be one tomorrow for exactly the reasons that you said. But it also points to the fact that the situation in Ethiopia has been one in which the collapse of the old regime has unleashed the forces of extreme nationalism in many parts of the country. And Abiy should be, I think, paying attention to that, trying to unify Ethiopia in a solid way rather than trying to take out the TPLF, because he's using a wedge here that could very well, and I think will, backfire on him in so many ways. The Amhara extreme nationalists, the NAMA, the National Association of the movement of Amhara, is a driving force, I think, in this, and it's pulling the state of Amhara into it. So you're playing to the more extreme forces. Abiy, I think, is in this because, in part, he's got an ego problem here, and he couldn't control the TPLF, couldn't come up with a way to resolve the issue there. And Isaias, I think, is one of the driving forces in this throughout, because Eritrea, from his standpoint, has had an agenda to displace the TPLF from day one. So the solution to this lay way back in Abiy and Debretsion talking with each other inside Ethiopia and resolving their differences, each one recognizing the role of the other, and taking the Eritrea situation off the table by Abiy lining up with Tigray to meet with Isaias and solve the border issue once and for all, to put it aside. The fact that all this is still out there to power this situation today, I think, is a a telling commentary on the leadership failures in Eritrea and in Ethiopia, particularly.
Mm.
And I think, actually, just to say, I think Tigray also shares some blame here. All three have let this get to this point without taking the steps necessary to bring about a peaceful resolution that was there to be had.
Mm-hmm. And where does this lead where does all of this leave the Ethiopian reform that the whole world actually uploaded in 2018, including through the awarding Abiy Ahmed the Nobel Peace Prize? The whole world was up for this, and it was meant to herald an era of progress and development and what have you for Ethiopia. Where does all of this leave all of that?
Well, I think, as I said, I think you could have seen this coming for some time. Ever since 2018, there was a lot of hope. There was a lot of possibility there. But I think Abiy took on too much, expected too quick and easy results from a very complex situation. And he needed to put much more attention into Ethiopia's problems and into resolving the Eritrea Ethiopia border issue. But he kept leaving these things off and hopping from one to the other. It's not a way to resolve problems. And I think the international community was very naive to have taken him and that seriously and fed his own sense of self to the point where I think he's beginning to lose touch, really, with the situation he's dealing with. I think the U.S. played a role in that and encouraging him, for example, to dissolve the EPRDF and to launch the Prosperity Party way too soon. It was the kind of thing that he should have done after the election, where he had unified the country under a new regime and given himself the legitimacy of an elected position, which he does not have still. Mm-hmm. But there was just too much rushing to goals that needed to be taken much more slowly, systematically, and seriously. And I think the international community bears a significant share of responsibility for encouraging that.
Right, it's a dire situation, perhaps not close to an end as we see it, because we see escalations. Only yesterday we saw rockets being fired into inside Eritrea. Asmara, no less, has been attacked, and that is a significant escalation in the situation, isn't it?
Well, I think it is. I think the TPLF and the Tigray state are projecting the war outward to try to find a way of leveraging Ethiopia and Eritrea, as well as the international community, to step in here to deal with it. They are under siege from every direction. And I understand why they're doing what they're doing. It does carry this into another level, and it could lead to an escalation of air war back into Tigray as well. The people who are going to pay for this are the people of Tigray and the peoples of Eritrea. Mm-hmm. Both those who are there as refugees and now are displaced with nobody there to really help them, and across the border, because this will have repercussions inside Eritrea as well. Yeah. And of course, there is also the situation in Sudan, which is not set up to deal with thousands of new refugees. So the whole area is going to pay a price for this crazy adventure.
Have the UNHCR or other NGOs working with refugees raised the alarm? Do we know what the status is? Is aid being distributed amongst the refugees?
I mean, this has been complicated up until now by the decision last January by Abiy's government to stop recognizing Eritrean refugees as they came in and giving them refugee status. So we've had many refugees coming in who have not been registered with the UN in the first place. We had the Hitsats camp on the agenda for closure. They backed away from that, and the NGOs, as I understand it, have gone back into Hitsats to do their work after first evacuating. But there's no supplies getting in now, so that anybody who wants to help has no way to do it except with the stores that are already existing in Tigray. That has been done as a stopgap thing. That Tigray state has been assisting refugees in many areas, but that can't keep going. I think we will rapidly get into a situation where you're going to have hunger, the displacement in the midst of a pandemic. Mm-hmm. This war is going to have repercussions in the health sector as well. There has to be at least a very minimum, a humanitarian corridor opened up to get international aid into the civilian population of Tigray and into the refugee camps. That could be done right through Sudan. And there have to be efforts to bring aid into Sudan for the refugees coming in. And I think in the long term, what we need is clearly mediated ceasefire and an effort to bring the various warring parties to the table so we can get out of this. Abi's decision, however, to put warrants out for the arrest of basically everybody in the TPLF leadership and the state, the armed forces there, the civilian side, leaves very little room for compromise, because you can't decapitate a state and negotiate with it at the same time. So at the very minimum, there are some steps that would have to be taken that went with a ceasefire to back off from the level of political escalation that's gone on here. And I don't see that happening in the short term unless there's much more international pressure on the warring sides to do that. And I think, unfortunately, the U.S. is not likely to play much of a role because we're in the midst of a transition and a crisis ourselves. Also, the outgoing Trump administration has already shown itself to be not a neutral party in this by its statements of support for Ethiopia. The Emirates now would be one country that could have some influence, but there are reports coming out now that the Emirates are involved in either providing or backing up drones that are being used in bombings in Tigray. The latest report that I saw, in fact, was that there's a cargo flight recently that went from Assab to Bahir Dar, which suggests that there is arms or some other goods coming from Assab going to Bahir Dar to be used for the war. So the other parties that could be involved in trying to do something about this may be actually involved in it behind the scenes, and that's worrisome even more so. The EU has made anodyne statements about peace for everybody, you know, whoopee. But the other, the main countries in Europe that might have an influence here have been sticking on the sidelines. As you and I have discussed as well, I think the religious community could get involved here. That's one community that Abiy listens to. I think the responsibility of everybody who is concerned about the humanitarian situation there needs to step up now and say something.
But the thing is, when you look at the options and the potential, the humanitarian disaster, if, you know, people coming out to Sudan is almost like saying that within weeks, these very people will end up in Libya and then in the Mediterranean and so on and so forth. So if we thought what we saw thus far was bad, then we're potentially looking at a major international disaster in terms of the...
Well, I would agree. I'm not sure I share the idea that they'll all head to Libya, because, I mean, maybe young fighters who come out would do that. But a lot of the refugees coming out are families. And they are likely to stay in place in the ways that refugees have traditionally. Libya also has not gotten as much traffic recently because of the problems there and the situation in Europe where people are being closed out. So I think we're going to have a regional crisis that could spread If people were going to go anywhere from there, they would head out toward Europe, but I don't know.
Right. So it's a situation that is still evolving, and
Yes,
we will all need to stay focused on the humanitarian crisis, really, because that is something that could potentially be a major disaster for the region, and definitely for the countries and the regions in Ethiopia that are involved in this. One thing before we finish, Dan, is the potential human rights violations that is said to have occurred in Maikadra. What do we know about that? That sounds like a gruesome situation.
Well, it does. I don't know what to make of that. It sounds horrifying if true. It sounds very complicated to make quick judgments about. I think that as part of any way forward here, there has to be an independent monitoring group that goes in and tries to sort out what happened. And I'm not sure who that would be, but it would probably have to come out under UN auspices or AU auspices. The AU stands ready to intervene in this situation to be helpful as well. I think at the same time that this is the kind of provocative situation that the stories are flying around in social media and the internet now that are inflaming the situation, inflaming passions, anger, and horrifying. There are thousands of Tigrayans being rounded up in Addis Ababa now in the same way that happened to Eritreans back in the 1998, 99, if not more so. There's fears among Tigrayans that they face potential genocide, and I don't know if there's a genuine fear that that's a genuine possibility here, but the fears are coming up to that point. So the tempers need to cool, and anybody who is in favor here of a peaceful solution needs to contain their own rhetoric and look for ways to communicate with one another and find a way out of this.
Yeah, we can only hope that cooler heads would be found in order to help us find a way out of this, because it could spell disaster for the, not just for the countries involved, but also much wider for the region as a whole.
I agree, and I think there are no possible winners here.
No. What would be your messages to the leaders, to Abiy, to Debrecen, to Isaias Afwerki? What would you like to say to them? And we'll conclude with that.
I think that they need to find at first a back channel to establish an open line of communications to one another, and then find a way of bringing that into an open discussion that cools things off. As I said, I think that the TPLF needs to accept Abiy in place where he is right now in Ethiopia. I think Ethiopia, the federal government, needs to accept that the TPLF is there to stay in Tigray, as does Isaias and Asmara. And Abiy needs to take an active role in trying to resolve the situation between Eritrea and Tigray, because otherwise he's going to have to deal with this in an ongoing way in a number of different directions that will destabilize Ethiopia and put the whole region at risk.
Professor Dan Connel, I thank you for your time and for your patience to put up with all the technical difficulties that I've had this afternoon and making time to speak to us. And yeah, thank you.
Salam, I'm glad to be here, and as bad as the situation is, I have enormous respect for all the work that you put into this, and keep it up.
Thanks.
Thank you.